CCP's machinations and foreign policy. Their approach to this goal set by Mao is comprehensive, and they are willing to wait. Slowly, inch by inch, they continue to covet territory that isn't theirs. The shoot and squat and the salami slicing approach has helped the PLA amass thousands of square miles of territory which is foreign territory. Their cartographic aggression is part of their schemes to annex more land that belongs to Bharat. Finally, Bharat has said that we will counter you measure for measure. Bharat will not allow CCP's string of beads, skullduggery to succeed. What do we mean by this? First, let's have a look at this map. Now, this is how China provoked earlier in April, where it actually dared to rename about 30 villages in Arunachal Pradesh. Interestingly, what they have done is over the last 7 years, since 2017, they have renamed villages all around Arunachal. So this is their string of beads. All around Arunachal is what they have tried to rename villages. And the newly elected NDA government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given the green light to renaming these locations in Tibet. So what Bharat is now doing is going to rename locations here in this region. Ningchi is not so far away from Arunachal Pradesh. So Lhasa is the capital, but Ningchi is directly in line with Arunachal Pradesh, somewhere here. So signaling a rebuttal to China's naming initiatives. Now there are places on the map that we are highlighting. These are 11 residential areas. Now in this entire region, there are 11 residential areas, 12 mountains, and all around this region, 12 mountains, 4 rivers, 1 lake, 1 mountain pass, which Bharat will rename. Now, 11 residential areas, 12 mountains, 4 rivers, 1 lake, 1 mountain pass, which we as a nation are going to rename. But the skullduggery comes here, ladies and gentlemen. The skullduggery, as far as Arunachal Pradesh and China is concerned, is if you look at this larger map, this is the border that we share with Tibet. This is Bhutan. This is again Tibet. And this is all Nepal. So Bharat's borders are with Nepal. Nepal shares this border with Tibet. And again, this is all Tibet. But in the lexicon, largely what's it's become? It's become Chinese occupied territory. Why is a big question. And over a period of time, they will if we continue. Yeah, this is the entire region where the CCP has tried to rename villages. But Bharat is going to counter that with names being renamed, mountains being renamed, again in this same border, in the same area. In fact, the locals are being asked to now encouraged to say that this is not China on the other side, it's Tibet. So it's our border with Tibet. So some initiatives that are being taken to counter this entire narrative, because do you know, 126 villages have been named since 2017. We are only talking about the 30 in April. What about the other 90 that have happened between 2017 and 2024? That's their strategy. They will wait, and eventually move in. They'll wait, eventually move in. So much so that the next map would have taken all those places which had been renamed, and then they will further rename. And that's how they'll say, and about 15, 20 years down the line, they'll claim this was always the map, it was never challenged. Smita Prakash, editor ANI, joining us. Anand Ranganathan, author with us, political commentator and scientist with us. And we also have Andrew K.P. Leung, China strategist, joining us. Tenzing Sundu, Tibetan writer and activist, will also be joining us in 30 seconds. Smita Prakash, your thoughts on what government of India is going to do? Are you willing to say der aaye durust hua hai, or are you saying, or are you thinking it's too late now?
Anand, I think the Indian response to China's renaming of locations, it's in Arunachal Pradesh, it's on expected lines. Yes, you can say that it is better late than never. This was China seeing if India gets needled or not, and if a slightly weaker government in India in terms of numbers will see that muscular foreign policy vis-a-vis its aggressive neighbors continue or not. It got its answers, if this report is to be believed, that India will rename places in Tibet. China was even miffed when Narendra Modi the accepted congratulatory messages from Taiwan President Lai Ching-te. If you remember, China has this one China policy, which everybody knows. So it doesn't recognize this post of the Taiwanese president. Now, China will have to figure out that Modi has come back for the third term, and his foreign policy will see no major shifts, at least not for now. His external affairs minister is the same as in the last term. And yes, the opposition in India is noisy, but the day the opposition parties are seen as siding with the public as siding with the opposition, with the countries which oppose India. Once the public in India sees that happening, they will lose whatever respect that they have. So whether it is China or Pakistan, if they are taking an aggressive position vis-a-vis India, India will speak in one voice. The tough stand will be against hostile neighbors. The opposition realizes that. And Modi, if he takes a softer approach towards any kind of aggressive stance by China, that will see his popularity slide down. So an aggressive stance is something that Modi will have to take, and the opposition in India will have to calibrate their approach accordingly. This is a great game, and no political party in India wants to go down in history as backing a foreign power, that too an aggressive foreign power. I think China doesn't realize that we have a noisy democracy, but the narratives which seem divisive come together in national interest in one voice, shoulder to shoulder.
But have they come a little too late, or perhaps they've come in time? Because the last 7 years has also been under Modi Sarkar, when these cartographic misadventures have happened by the PLA. 126 locations have been renamed in Arunachal Pradesh. At least there is a shift from saying what's in a name and what's the big deal if they change it, because they've realized the larger long game that's being played by the CCP. Andrew K.P. Leung, your thoughts, sir? Is this a strategy that's worked for the PLA and the CCP time and again? Continue to rename, redraw the maps, and then after half a century, claim that land as their own?
Well, these territorial disputes has been going on for decades, and renaming villages or towns on the other side is not going to change the reality. But the reality remains that both leaders in China and India do not want to escalate the tension, because it doesn't serve the interests of either nation. But these territorial disputes remain, and it continue to be an unnecessary friction between these two countries, which have a lot in common to areas to cooperate, including climate change and green energy and so on. So I think it's unfortunate that these territorial disputes are left to fester. And as I said, renaming them is not going to change the situation.
But that's the Tenzing Sundu, that's the first step. Create a dispute where there is none. Then lay claim where there is none. And then occupy when you're on where you're not supposed to be. Look what's happened with Tibet. The upper Tibet and the lower Tibet, they've all changed. What's remaining is only central Tibet. The rest of it has been annexed and made a part of Greater China.
Well, Tibet has always been recognized as part of China, according to the United Nations and so on.
No. Tibet was never part of China, sir. The 1842 Treaty of Chushul was signed between the Dalai Lama in Tibet and with Raja Ranjit Singh. There was no China there at that time. So it was never part of China. Tenzing Sundu. Let Mr. Tenzing Sundu respond.
Andrew, listen. Suno, hamara baat suno. The conflict between India and China today is about Tibet. It's a country which was invaded upon by China in 1949 and 1950. And Andrew was right in saying that these problems have been going on for decades. It is true, not for centuries, because it has been 65 years ever since His Holiness the Dalai Lama escaped from Tibet and came to India. Until that time, Tibet was free and independent. And now let us come to the issue of the border. The McMahon border between Tibet and India, not China, Tibet and India, was signed on the 24th of March 1914 China was not in Tibet. It was independent Tibet. So this is the border we are talking about. So whether it's the other side of Tawang or this side of Tawang, at one point of time, it was Tibet. Government of Tibet, Tibet government recognized that as part of India on that day in 1914. And there was no China, and China has no business to talk about Arunachal Pradesh today. His Holiness the Dalai Lama had again and again visited Tawang, gave teachings, and in front of thousands of them, and recognized India and thanked India for giving refuge to the Tibetans. Now, I want to point out here, CNN TV18, the map you are showing here, it's only a truncated part of Tibet. Entire Tibet, 2.5 million square kilometers of land.
Yes.
So this is 1/4 the size of China that China had invaded. And not only Tibet, China had invaded Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, Manchuria, and all these 4 occupied countries put together make 60% of China's landmass. ये सब चाइना ने चोरी किया है और हमें ये पूरा साफ जाहिर से पूरी दुनिया में हमें बताना चाहिए. Andrew does not know this, and we must tell the world. Now, regarding this Tit-For-Tat Act, I would encourage the government of India, especially the third term, Narendra Modi ji's government, the NDA, to tell them, I want to say that the real issue is not about naming places here and there. It's a childish game. It's a childish game. We must play the larger game, insist upon the McMahon Treaty, which was duly signed by India at that time, British India and Tibet, and this is the border, and this was also passed as a resolution supported by United States this time. So this is what we should look at, much larger picture of Tibet and India. And Tibet's independence is India's security.
1914, the McMahon Line and the treaty was signed. 1959, Zhou Enlai says that we don't recognize it. And this is following Mao's blueprint, Dr. Ranganathan. And thereafter, the whole narrative has been controlled by the CCP and the PLA. And he's right. Tenzin Sundu is very, very right. In that map, the red lines which you see, there is East Turkestan, which is actually now called Xinjiang or New Territory. There is the Upper Tibet and there is Lower Tibet. So Tibet is then right into the inner China. So Greater China and smaller China, there's a huge difference. If you can call that map, you can see it there. Right above what is marked as Tibet today, as far as the cartographic, this one. Let's just put this out here if we can, quickly before I bring in Dr. Rangnath. So he's right. This part, this is actually Xinjiang or New Territory. This is Tibet. This is also Tibet. So, and then there is Manchuria. So what China is a very, very small portion. 60% of this land that you see, ladies and gentlemen, that makes China the size that it is, actually belongs to 3 or 4 other nations. There is Manchuria there is Inner Mongolia there is East Turkestan, and then there is Tibet, as Mr. Tenzin Sundu was saying. Yes, this is what is represented today as Tibet, ladies and gentlemen. This is what is, this is only central Tibet. This is a very small portion. There is a huge, larger region too. Yes, Dr. Ranganathan.
Good evening, Anand, and good evening to my fellow panelists. Some of them are real experts, so I speak here as a layman. A couple of points to make. Number one, look, India is, or China, let me put it that way, is not a friend of India. And let me say it unequivocally, it is not India's fault that this is the case. Time and again, we have extended our hand to shake that of China. And time and again, we have been rebuffed. I will give you just 3 examples. I could give more starting from 1962, maybe even before that. But the fact of the matter is that at long last in 2020, we realized, or China realized, or was made to realize that the India of 2020 was not the India of 1962. China was surprised by the way we defended and attacked. It genuinely was. But unfortunately, what has happened and of course the truth then came out that the LAC, more than half of the LAC is actually categorized as differing perceptions. So these border disputes are more than a century old, as you yourself correctly said. And it was also a fact that during the UPA, they were considered as differing perception and borders that were in dispute, and there were so many transgressions, I think more than 600. In 2013, in fact, they were documented. In 2013, the UPA secretary, I think foreign secretary, said that China has occupied 600 square kilometers of eastern Ladakh. But it was always Modi's fault. Be that as it may, while India of 2020 was not India of 1962, I'm afraid India of 2024 had become India of 1962, and it is perplexing to me why. So this is a welcome change. And I'll tell you why. Because from 2020 to 2024, China should have been made to pay the price, and it wasn't. It devastated not only the world economy, but Indian economy. It killed millions because of its direct role in the COVID spread, and we did nothing. The fact of the matter also is that while our trade imbalance was, I think, $70 billion, it is now more than $110 billion. Our trade exchange with China is upwards of $130 billion. So unfortunately, we let it slip, this golden opportunity where we could have wrenched all those companies that were fed up of China to come to India. There should have been a white paper. So I'm not going to blame China because I apply the Anderson reason. If China is a criminal, it is the point of China to indulge in crime. We should have done what we should have, and we didn't. But be that as it may, I think fresh beginnings, Moti 3. So let us hope that this continues. And the proof of the pudding obviously would be in the eating. I would like the map that you have shown and the real China that you've shown as little bit larger than Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. I would want that Indian map would like to display that.
What News18.com has done, and if you on the News18.com website, we've redefined the territories and we have put the actual names, and we've also said that this is the actual China and these are the territories that it occupies. So we've got those, we've got that map, and we'll try and put that out also, what we've put out on News18.com. So we're very, very clear as a channel. But is the government clear, Smita Prakash? 7 years it's taken them to decide that we will also rename the areas. The populations are actually moving away rather than repopulating the borders and pushing people to the borders and getting people there. So those are challenges. Also, that the people of Arunachal, they all speak Hindi, but they don't say Indo-Tibet, they say Indo-China. So their lexicon has also been altered over a period of time. This is how the CCP plays the long game. Are we reading that long game correctly finally? And is what's being done enough?
Also understand, Anand, that when you say that China's doing so much, India doesn't, India moves slow, it does. Like, remember the old adage about the dragon and the elephant, that India is slow in doing things. This is one of the pitfalls of having a democracy, that it takes time. Now, look, there's another democracy. Let's see Canada. They've just passed a motion supporting Tibetan self-determination. Now, can India do that? Can the Indian Parliament move something like this? You can be certain that if India moves something, you'll see an aggression from China regarding Kashmir. Now, can we become like Canada? Of course, we have strained relations with Canada right now. But can we take these kind of steps? The fact is that China sits, in our region. China doesn't sit near Canada. So Canada can take these aggressive steps. But for India, it has to think a lot before doing it. Now, China, while we were busy with domestic affairs, China held its 65th anniversary celebrations of the Tibetan takeover, and they are constructing new villages on India's border, on Bhutan's border, and it's continuously building these villages. And it doesn't matter to them. They don't care what the world says. They don't care what India says. And we have noticed this. Now, when you ask me a question that why don't people from Arunachal say this, the point is that in India, it takes time, like I said. And Dr. Ranganath, I would agree with what Dr. Ranganathan said, that it's time for new beginnings. What happens is that we have a new government in place, and it is continuation of our foreign policy, and it will be dynamic if China continues with these kind of aggressive measures. Now, earlier it was said that just because they rename some villages, that doesn't make those villages theirs. But there is a perfidious plan in doing this. Everybody knows how these things work, right? How
Right.
names got changed in Kashmir. You remember all those things which happened. Historically, when the names got changed, all these things matter a lot.
Yes.
So I think China realizes that they are in it for the long term, and they think India having a democracy, we think in terms of every 5 years. That's not the case now anymore.
Correct. So that's exactly what I was trying to tell you, that from 1949, the thought continuum, 75 years down the line, has not deviated. In fact, Xi Jinping is far more steadfast on Mao's line than anybody else, that many would argue within the CCP. But for us, that's the thought process, that 5 saal mein sarkar badlegi, and they are thinking only for the next 5 years. They are not thinking about the longevity of the nation or the long-term prospects of the nation. Tenzin Sundu, quickly, I just want to understand what more can be done. Can the Tibetans be a little more vocal? Because there are a lot of Tibetans who are now being made to learn Mandarin. They're being asked to adopt the more quote-unquote modern and progressive ways of the Han way. Now, all of that, they're being influenced and weaned away from Tibetan culture itself. True, false. And if all that happens, then is there not a total demographic genocide too? Then who pushes the Tibetan cause? Who takes the fight up for the Tibetans then? Because the CCP has been claiming that Tibetans are very, very happy with the CCP route. That's what they're saying. You're on mute, Tenzin.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Your question reflects a level of ignorance in India about the Tibetan freedom movement. Every time Chinese president, prime ministers, they come to India, we go out and protest. And I had been to jail 16 times. 16 baar jail gaya hu, mainly because India wanted to suppress the Tibetan movement. And more than the movement here in exile, it is the Tibetans inside Tibet, where we have lost more than 1 million Tibetans under the Chinese repression. And in the recent 10-12 years, 157 Tibetans burned themselves in the form of self-immolations. But how many people in India know about it? Most of them, they don't know. Because talking about Tibet in India has been banned up until now. Even now, none of the Indian textbooks talk about Tibet. Tibet is India's largest neighboring country.
Yes.
And in the textbooks of geography, history, there's no mention of Tibet. For India, Tibet is a blank area. They have no idea. And if Indian population, if Indian youth do not know what lies beyond the Himalayas, how is India ever going to counter China and China's measures, like, for example, naming these? So these names that China put out, I have seen, I went one by one, I have noticed that these are names that the independent Tibet used to look at these names. These are original names of Arunachal Pradesh at the time when Tibet was free and independent. So what China is very cleverly trying to do is firstly, China has invaded Tibet, which sadly, India is recognizing Tibet as part of China. And China is now using that and saying that Arunachal Pradesh used to be part of China, and these are the names of the places of Arunachal Pradesh at the time when Tibet was free and independent. So therefore, I am saying there's no other way. There's no tit-for-tat game. The only way for India is to recognize that India's relationship was and is and going to be with Tibet. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the ultimate leader of the Tibetan people.
Interesting that you
Anand, can I just take 5 seconds?
Yeah, interesting that you say that they're actually using the original 1914 or the 1800s, 1900s Tibetan names, so that they tell the Tibetan people that we are only renaming it what you used to call it or your ancestors used to call it. So support us rather than supporting India. So drive a wedge between India and Tibet there. So so that game also being played there. Very, very valid point made.
One more.
Okay, 10 more seconds to Tenzin and then Dr. Ranganathan.
And India is now researching some of the names in Tibet which the Chinese changed after invasion. For example, Hoga is an important area above Tawang in Tsona area. There's a place called Hoga.
Yeah.
Now, China changed the name to Shannan, which actually means southern place.
Correct.
So, India is now researching some of these names and changing it back to Tibetan names.
Tibetan names.
So
both
in that way, the real Tibet is emerging.
Right.
And what India needs to do is assert on McMahon border, which is India and Tibet border, and completely negate what China is saying. And in that way, India can place itself in a position of power by questioning China's invasion of Tibet.
Anand, can I?
Strong point that you make. Yes, Dr. Ranganathan, and then final word to Andrew Leung. Yeah.
Very briefly, with the greatest of respect to the Tibetan activist, Mr. Tenzin, he's a real legend and I stand with him. I hope he will not take me wrongly, but Mr. Tenzin, please do not patronize us. We know your struggle, we stand with you, but it is also a fact that have you ever asked the revered Dalai Lama to be as vociferous as you in demanding for an independent Tibet? It is he who says that Tibet is part of China. So please practice what you preach. I would be very delighted if you were to say what have you told us to Dalai Lama.
I must respond. I must respond to that. I must respond to this. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a guest in India, and he respects Government of India's position. We are dependent on the Government of India and the refuge we have received, and therefore respecting India's
Does
position.
That not answer your question,
Tibet is part of China, and that's how His Holiness is continuing to speak for autonomy and not for independence. आजादी किसको नहीं चाहिए? सबको आजादी चाहिए. आपको चाहिए, हमें भी चाहिए. आजादी के लिए हम मरे हैं और मरने के लिए तैयार भी हैं.
Right. In fact, the biggest damage in the past, before the Sikh regiment stepped up to back the Bihar regiment, has been by the Tibetans who have actually hurt and the Gorkhas and the Tibetans who have hurt the PLA in the past, and they've done it very well. But sadly, those strategies have been revised, and a lot of it has been put paid right now. But will that be revived? We'll have to wait and watch. But clearly, measure for measure, have run out of time. But Andrew K. Pilong, sir, the final 45 seconds to 60 seconds to you, because we lost your video in between. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you. Well, in fact, that the Tibet belongs to China, the fact remains still carry on today, because according to the United Nations, Tibet has never been recognized as a separate territory. And if we look at history, the history of Tibet goes back, thousands of years, and then many centuries before 1950s. Tibet was part of China, part of the imperial China for a long time. So the rhetoric that somehow Tibet is separated from China is never recognized by China, it's never recognized by the United Nations, and renaming the places on either side is not going to change the reality.
Sir, where today the PLA has its nuclear facilities in Xinjiang, there used to be Sharda Lipi spoken there, sir, and there are age-old temples that have been found. So should India say that all that land belongs to Bharat and we should get all of that land? You want to go how many centuries behind? I'm not even going. We are just going about 110 years ago in 1914, sir, where the Treaty of McMahon Line was drawn, and that was drawn between the British ruled India and Tibet. There was no China there. So we are going back only 110 years. You want to go a few centuries? Let's go back. How far back do you want to go till the time there was no China at all? So let's not get into this kind of a rhetoric after saying that you don't want to get into rhetoric, Andrew K. P. Leong. Have to move on. Have to move on. Andrew K. P. Leong and Tenzing Sendhu, thank you very, very much for joining us. Anand Ranganathan and Smita Prakash, stay on. Ladies and gentlemen, the other story, a day after, and it was broken here on this on the right stand on our Tuesday edition, where beg your pardon, Monday edition, where a day after the Modi government was drawn,